So good afternoon. Welcome to our Energy Insight webinar. I'm just going to give it a minute or so as we've seen a number of people still adding on. So give it 30 seconds or so. So just for those who are joining, I can still see people are coming in and dialing in. So I'm just going to give it a few more moments for other people to join. Okay, well, we're a couple of minutes over, so I'm going to make a start now, if that's okay. So, yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Evans. I'm a strategic client lead here at npower Business Solutions, and I'll be hosting this afternoon's Energy Insight webinar. Before we start, I just wanted to say that whilst we do everything that we can to bring these updates throughout the year to provide you with the latest energy news and policy developments, we unfortunately cannot cover everything. But since our last Energy Insight webinar, it's been really busy when it comes to the energy policy landscape. You'll notice, for example, that we've not included the latest support or incentives for businesses announced by the Labour government following Rachel Reeves' spring statement on the 26th of March. And this is sadly because there was nothing new to share. As you'll all be aware, the mini-budget focused mainly on benefit cuts and increases to defence spending. However, a new planning and infrastructure bill was flagged and promises to streamline planning processes to support the building of more houses and critical infrastructure. The latter will be especially relevant to the Clean Power 2030 plans that Stephen Evans will discuss later in the webinar. Also, hidden away in the supporting documents was a consultation to potentially review the Climate Change Levy, or CCL, to energy invoices, and to remove it from any electricity used for electrolysis to provide hydrogen. Now, this consultation will continue until the 7th of May, but if you're interested, you'll find a link to it at gov.uk/consultations. But there was no mention of net zero. There were no incentives for energy efficiencies or carbon reduction investments for businesses. So, without further ado, we have a lot to get through in the next hour, so let's make a start. So the content that we're going to be covering today is wholesale energy price update, and Rob Buckley will be joining us from CornwallInsight to discuss the main factors businesses should consider this year when they're purchasing their energy commodities. We'll then discuss the true cost of clean power. Stephen Evans, who is NBS's Senior Costing and Risk Manager, will delve into the impact of the Clean Power 2030 commitment and the significant additional costs in network and policy charges added to electricity invoices. And last, but by no means least, we'll take why it's time to take a CPPA off your to-do list. Michelle Stevens from our Generation Services team will explain why now is an opportune moment to include a Corporate Power Purchasing Agreement, or CPPA, in your plan for securing a direct source of clean energy with future-proofed price stability. We will then have time to go through some pre-submitted questions. However, if you do have any questions that come up during the course of the webinar, please type it in the questions tab on your screen. I will certainly aim to get through as many as we possibly can. However, apologies in advance if we don't manage to answer them all, but rest assured we will respond by email shortly afterwards. So without further ado, can I ask Rob Buckley to join me on stage, please?
Hello, Greg.
Good afternoon, Rob. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Yes, sun's
Excellent.
out here in Norwich, and thank you for inviting me to join you today and all the team on the webinar just to discuss a few thoughts on the outlook for wholesale energy prices.
Yeah, we're certainly looking forward to it. So without further ado, Rob, I'm going to just pass on to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar. It's great to have the opportunity to chat to you about some thoughts on where wholesale markets are right now, as we speak, in probably the most turbulent week in economics in my lifetime. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but it's certainly we've not seen the like of this, I don't think, for a few decades. So who am I? I'm Robert Buckley. I'm head of strategic accounts at CornwallInsight. We're independent advisors and commentators on the market. The company was actually formed in March 2005. So we're just now starting our 20th year of activity within the market. And we've got a very deep body of research on wholesale markets and the industry cost chain, which I'm going to chat to. Some of you will be aware perhaps of our business energy cost forecast. So I'm going to draw from a number of insights from that in what I say. So you've got a broad and deep activity in forecasting, commentating and researching on the business energy markets, independently owned and operated. So that's a little bit about me and the company and why we're on the platform today. And what I want to do is just talk about a few principles behind where wholesale energy markets have been and try and establish what they may mean for the future. And it is very, very, it's almost a trite point really, but we have got used to what feels like extreme volatility in wholesale energy markets over recent years. We had COVID-19 rapidly followed by the energy crisis triggered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We've seen the complete reordering of the European gas market, all within a 5-year timeline. And to try and show the effect of that, we've got a chart here that shows the proportion of the bill that was made up by wholesale costs and non-wholesale costs in the last 7 or 8 years. Now, of course, the bill went up and down each year, so we've taken 100% of numbers that of themselves were very, very high. But you can see that just looking at the proportions, the wholesale price has varied from a third of the bill in 2019, 2020, when the market crashed because of COVID, to upwards of 80% in 22, 23, when the market went to levels, the like of which I hope we will never have to suffer again. But so the narrative is one of extreme volatility and a very volatile and increasingly volatile international energy markets. And when we come to talk about UK energy policy and decarbonisation, upping indigenous production, national production within these shores is a very important objective. I won't dwell too long on these series of charts, but I wanted to show you how wholesale prices have cycled. This is the day-ahead gas price right back to 2002. Have a look at the scale, 20p to a pound. We all felt that was quite traumatic back in 2008, and there are some incidents there that were responsible for some of those peaks and troughs. Then we come along to the last decades, and you can again see the cycling of the market. Never got as high as 2008. Again, look at the scale, £1.20 a therm. And then, of course, we come to the spring and summer of 2022 and 2023, where prices really did get as high as £8 a therm. So that's 8 times the maximum of the scale of we've seen in the previous 2 decades, and prompted some very significant interventions in the market by the UK government to take the top off these rates for businesses and for householders. So it is going back to the shocks in terms of oil that we saw in 1974 and 1979, which I am too young to remember properly. But it is that kind of order of magnitude of shock that we had. And I think the thing that we would take from this is that this was caused by the deliberate withholding of supply from the market, which is what we also saw in those 2 1970s energy price shocks. So going back to the future, as it were, but this time on gas rather than on oil. And we're living with the effects of that today. As I said, Europe has switched away from 45% Russian gas to about 20%, and into the gap has come the United States. And what's going on in the United States, their attitude to the world has really been turned upside down by the new president. And, we want to try and understand whether, we thought we could rely on the United States as a benign provider of gas of last resort to Western Europe. Is that assumption still a valid one after what the president has been saying and doing in recent weeks? Well, we'll maybe pick up that in some of the Q&A. But gas, implicit in everything I've said, is that gas remains the price-driving fuel for electricity. It is the marginal fuel, and means the power price is very, very sensitive to the gas price, despite significantly increasing quantities of renewables on the system. One of the questions that we'll come to for the medium-term outlook is when the market gets to a tipping point and renewables becomes the primary price driver rather than marginal gas. And that, I think, is actually the fundamental good news in the story here, that we are increasing our production of renewables. A lot of that is indigenous, and that will flip the power market away from a gas link to more power on power competition. You can see there some information on where our gas is coming from. United States provided 70% of the UK's LNG in the year to November. That's absolutely unheard of, and a really, really substantial shift. And that, as I mentioned, we've got 45% US gas now into Western Europe. So very importantly underlines that Britain, Ireland, Western Europe now need to compete for LNG globally. That, would you believe, has been relatively okay over recent months and years because Asian demand is currently quite low. What happens if and when this demand returns? Again, is another question that's important for the medium to longer term. I will just put on the table here the increasing reliance on spending on things on defence will distract from other things that maybe include renewables support. But we do have a poll actually that we'd like you to answer for us, and really it's to understand the extent to which people are exposed to short-term or maybe perhaps slightly longer-term movements in the market. So if people can answer the question, and we can maybe see what the poll results are. Okay, so that's interesting. So I think we need to get 100 votes. So we're getting there nicely. If you haven't voted, please do. The shape of the isn't really changing. So we've just gone over 100. So 26, 27%, more than 18 months before their contract comes to an end. Of course, you may have a flex contract and you may need to make purchase decisions within that time scale. A quarter in the next 6 to 12 months. 23%, another quarter. So really, it's a quarter. So a quarter more than 18 months, a quarter 12 to 18 months, a quarter 6 to 12 months. And then of the remaining balance, it's 17% currently not in a contract and 9% in the next 6 months. So that's a really broad spread of responses there, and indicates that we've got concern all along the forward curve, right from the immediate at the moment. What's the prospects for the summer through to, well, where are we looking over a slightly longer term period? I must admit, I was kind of expecting there might be a bit more towards the front end of the forward curve. So in terms of where we're going, I think policy, as ever, remains very, very important. The consensus on climate is changing. On energy policy, we've got a climate skeptical US administration, and that's beginning to give confidence to perhaps some of the more climate skeptical voices elsewhere, and certainly encouraging others to look at the costs and burdens of the regimes that are developed to support particularly power decarbonisation, as we can see. And that in turn, I know Steve's going to pick up these, so I won't dwell on them, but there are a number of big policy decisions that need to be taken if we are going to deliver our Clean Power 2030 target. And as we would very much see this as a make or break time for the energy policy of the UK, of the new UK government. In terms of where we see things going, our view is that, as I've said, decarbonisation of the power system will continue. It is accelerating. Whether it accelerates up to get to 2030, don't know, not convinced, but it will certainly be sufficient to drive that tipping point away from gas and towards a future of a lower baseline, but probably still very volatile prices, shown a track there from our recent modelling work, from our benchmark power curve, that shows a downward track for seasonal prices going out to 2030. That, I think, is good news. I think we're very, very exposed to the gas market at the moment. Market-driven prices are about 50% higher than they were a year ago. So it's whatever we can do to shift away from that gas-driven dependency in our wholesale energy prices must be a good thing for our economy. And certainly, I've set out a few themes that we see as important, and a number of them are going to be themes for this discussion, and would certainly layer over the very commodity-driven outlook that I've discussed just now, Greg. But hopefully that's given people on the call a good flavour for where we're coming from and how much agency we have within the UK as a nation to affect these things.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Lots of interesting information there, and thank you for your time. I think my big takeaway is it feels like broadly a bearish situation. Therefore, dare I say it, broadly cautious optimism in the markets in the forthcoming quarters.
In the medium term, yes, we've spent an awful lot of money to decarbonise our power system and to shift away from a gas-driven power market. That will happen. We can get into debates on whether we need to change our trading arrangements to make it happen quicker, but that will happen, and that's the fundamental core of the message that I want to leave people with today.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, Rob. I know you'll be joining us later on for the Q&A, but thank you for your insight and thank you for the time that you've spent with us today. So next up, as if by magic, Mr. Stephen Evans, who's appeared to walk us through the true cost of clean energy. So, Stephen, some good news to start with, and now let's talk about the non-commodity charges, shall we?
Yes, let's talk about them. Apologies if this is perhaps a little less upbeat than Robert's, but super important and stuff that you absolutely need to be aware of. Could we have our poll to start off? We thought we'd have a poll to get people's sort of level of understanding and concern with Clean Power 2030. How concerned are you about the financial impact of it on your business? Are you unsure and you want to know more? You're slightly concerned, or you're very concerned with it? While you're giving that some thought, and I would definitely encourage you to vote so we can sense it. Clean Power 2030, for those of you who are less aware of these things or would like a primer, is a goal that the Labour government have set up of delivering 95% of their electricity from 95% of Great British electricity from clean sources, which includes renewable as well as biomass and nuclear, and even energy from waste by 2030. So far we have got, yes, it looks as if this is a good stop for me to do. We've got 57% of people unsure and they want to know more, 26% of people slightly concerned, and 17% of people very concerned. We should have had another one for not at all concerned as well. And we have in mind to actually rerun this poll at the end of it to see how people have found the session today. So if I click on, this all started back in about a year ago, to be honest, when the Labour Party were putting together their general election manifesto, and they said we think we know we're committed to reducing, to decarbonising, reducing carbon emissions, and also to the security supply benefits that you get from not being so at the mercy of importing gas from other countries. So we want to be 100% clean electricity by 2030, and that was on some of the manifestos and documents that you might have read. When Labour won the general election last July, they then commissioned NESO, National Electricity System Operator, to do some research into it, and can we actually achieve this? And if we can achieve it, how would you go about doing it? And they came back and said 100%'s a big ask, but 95% you can do. You have to build an awful lot of renewables, and either further renewables on top of the awful lot of renewables, or a lot of hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. But if you do that, you can just about deliver it. And they came up with some extra sort of thinking around the sides around delivering it. You'll need to change your planning and consenting laws. You'll need to work on your supply chains. And I saw in the news just this week, the government is setting up a number of regional schemes to get apprentices on in order to help to deliver some of the Clean Power 2030. If people are being trained up in 25, 6, 7, then they can be helping to roll out the technology in 28, 9, and 30, and so on. And so that was published by NESO in November, and then in December of last year. So this is what 4 or 5 months ago now. Yeah, 4 months ago now. Quite surprisingly, the government came out and said, yes, we'll do it. We'll do what NESO has said. We'll go with all of the plans. And ever since then, they've been going hell for leather with it. They've already shaken up the planning law. So it doesn't matter when you put in your electricity capacity request, they're sort of throwing the box away, and they're saying, is it going to help deliver Clean Power 2030? And if it is, we're interested, and if not, we'll park you till 2031. So it's all pretty pretty frenetic at the moment, I think you could say. And the scale of ambition is absolutely enormous, as these two scales on the right hand side show. So offshore wind, the first offshore wind, Greg, any idea when the first offshore wind was put in place in the UK?
Offshore wind, I'm going to go early 90s.
2010.
Oh, there you go.
Like that.
30 years out there.
And in 15 years, we've delivered 15 gigawatts, of offshore. And in the next 5 years, we're going to deliver another 30. Now, some of that is already committed to under the CFD, but nevertheless, that's an awful lot of that's an awful acceleration required. So I'll give you a chance to redeem yourself, Greg. When was the first onshore wind put in?
I really didn't, but I'm going to take a stab at 2016.
Oh no, onshore's easier than offshore because that's just sticking it in the ground. That's about 2000.
Okay.
So I won't ask you any more questions.
No, please don't.
But thank you for being interactive. Yeah, so it's taken 25 years to deliver 14 gigs of onshore, and we're going to do the same again in the next 5 years. Rather less is consented at the moment because it's been out of the CFD scheme for a little while, but we're expecting that to come back in soon. So it's a big change. In short, it is two things. It is, number one, a huge renewables build, and number two, it is a huge transmission build. And I'll come on to each of those in turn. For the huge renewables build, this is the single scheme or vehicle by which all of this is being delivered, whether it's onshore wind, offshore wind, floating wind, solar. It's going through the contracts for difference. And all of this intermittent generation that is hard to schedule is actually going to be priced through day ahead. So a top up between the price at day ahead and the strike price that they are delivered at. And we expect the auction this summer, it's called Allocation Round 7 or AR7, as well as AR8. They are the only two opportunities to get contracts with enough time to build it before you get to 2030. So these are absolutely essential, and we're going to keep an incredibly close eye on it. And all of the volumes on the last slide, as well as solar and other things, need to be delivered through contracts for difference. So the scale of the cost, well, at the moment, it actually changes day to day. 9.1, I think, was the average for a month or two ago. It wobbles around between sort of 8 and 12, and so for a 30 gig customer on £9 megawatt hour, that's £275,000 a year of CFD bill. A lot. Unfortunately, in the future, the pie chart is bigger. We expect it to be closer to £30 a megawatt hour because of all the technology. We're going to see much lower strike prices for some of the technologies than we've had for some of these technologies in the future than we've had in the past. For example, offshore wind in 2017 had a high strike price. The technology cost has come off, so you have a strike price around 50. Nevertheless, a 30 gig customer by 2030 may expect to pay over £860,000 for their costs. These are highly volatile and subject to our forecasts change very regularly as we get new information about this. So I'm not going to be held to this permanently, but it does give a clear indication of the scale of the growth on it. So I talked about renewables. The other big part of it is the networks. So the transmission network use of system, or TNUoS. That cost back in the 90s and the noughties was really, really low because most of the electricity being generated was being done in power stations that were close to where people are based. And so the electrons, so to speak, from the power station only had to skip a handful of miles on the transmission network before they can be popped off, delivered onto the distribution network, and then delivered to people's houses. And for that reason, historically, the distribution network, BSUoS, has been really, really big, but TNUoS has been much, much smaller in comparison. What you're getting with the wind and the solar that is being built, it's being built in remote places. And so you're having to build motorways of pylons simply to get the electricity. Rather than traveling maybe a dozen miles, it's traveling 600-700 miles from well off the coast of Aberdeen all the way down to, say, I'm living Leamington Spa today. So yeah, there's a whole extra bit of infrastructure that we never really had to rely on in anger until more recently. And I'm afraid these costs are going up as well. The £11.8 a megawatt hour, I recognise the vast majority of the cost is actually as a fixed cost in a standing or a capacity charge, but the equivalent for a 30 gig customer now might be £560,000 a year. In 2030, that could be over that. We expect that to be over £1 million. And the transmission operators, so National Grid, Scottish and Southern, and Scottish Power, have submitted back in January their RIIO-3 business plan. And as you can imagine, they're very excited about Clean Power 2030 because the transmission company wants to build transmission assets. So they've put in essentially what the Clean Power 2030 report from NESO has recommended they need to do. It will be very interesting in July when we get an early view from Ofgem on how much of those big plans are likely to take place. We don't assume all of it will, but we'll be much more confident in our assumptions once we get there. I'm conscious of time, so I have to be fairly quick on this last one, balancing services use of system. The big problem is essentially the interplay between building lots of renewables off the coast of Britain and not having enough electricity networks. And if you don't have enough transmission wires, then you have to pay the wind farms and solars to turn off, and then you have to pay gas-fired generation near to people to turn on. Last year that was £1.5 billion. If NESO estimated that if you build all the renewables and you don't build any networks, then that's going to be £12 billion a year, which is huge. We think that, well, we hope that the networks won't lag behind the renewables, and if so, then it will increase, but not as badly as it can. But to give an indication of scale, BSUoS is about £13 a megawatt at the moment. That's a £400,000 bill for a 30 gig customer. We see that going to £22 a megawatt hour, which would be just shy of 700,000. Although if the renewables builds fast and there's delays on the transmission, it could well be £30-35 a megawatt hour briefly until the networks catch up. All of which leads us to this pretty depressing graph that shows ever since 2001 we've had stepwise increases in commodity costs. We expect those to exceed £180 a megawatt hour, 18 pence a kilowatt hour equivalent by 2030, and take up a growing share of the overall customer bill. So we have kind of reflected Rob's more bearish view of wholesale prices, which are shrinking at least a little bit during this decade, but unfortunately the overall height of the bar is still rising for the time being. 2030s is probably needs another webinar to discuss, but there might be some respite in the long term. So it's going to affect commodity prices as well. I was talking about the contracts for difference scheme, and by 2030 we expect about half of all UK generation to go through contracts for difference with a day-ahead index. What that means is that those generators are unlikely to be selling their electricity in the forward market. So we're anticipating something of an exodus of generators selling from the forward market into the day-ahead market. Liquidity for electricity is already a lot worse than it is for gas, and we don't see that situation improving. We also see, I suppose, related to volatility and shape, historically, power prices have been high when it's been cold and demand has gone up, and they've gone down when it's been mild and there's been less demand for it. In the future, we still expect temperature to play an effect, but also if it's windier all of a sudden, then we expect prices to fall. And if we have, as some people may have heard of, Dunkelflaute, it's a German word which effectively means sort of a dark dull, a dark doldrum. So it means it's dark and there's no wind, and then you don't get any solar, you don't get any wind, and your day-ahead prices shoot through the roof. So that's leading to changes in volatility and changes in shape. As a result of those things, we expect customer hedging to potentially adapt to these changing circumstances. There may well be greater incentives in the future for customers to purchase a portion of their electricity in the day-ahead market rather than in the forward market. And finally, longer term trend. And I did a webinar with a colleague of mine, Mark. We'll put a link in the chat to this, to say if you build enough renewables in the UK, surely eventually prices will fall, and they will fall, but only in half-hour periods where you don't need any gas at all. As soon as there's even a half a megawatt hour of gas-fired generation needed in a period, then the prices are set by gas. But when you don't have any at all, the prices can collapse down to maybe 20 or 30 pounds a megawatt hour. And last summer we did see a whole load of troughs in the summer price when gas was kicked out of the merit order altogether, and we expect to see more of them. So what can you do? The cheapest megawatt hour of electricity is the one that you never buy. I know this is a very familiar message for people on the call, but I'm afraid it's as pertinent as ever, especially with the prices going up. We would also recommend that you think about on-site generation. This has got a solar panel picture, but it doesn't just have to be solar or even wind. You could even have diesel or gas generators on site. The point is, any electricity behind the meter isn't paying BSUoS, it isn't paying CFD, it isn't paying capacity market. So there's a whole load of variable costs, industry costs that you're avoiding altogether as soon as you're using your generation instead. And even if you just stick a battery behind the meter and you charge it up off peak and then you discharge it at peak, you can save a whole load of high capacity market and other costs. And if you're able to reduce your peak demand enough, you may be able to then explore reducing your network capacity. That's a semi-permanent thing insofar as once you've reduced it, it's harder to get it back and it can take time to do that. But as soon as you reduce your network capacity, then your GEOS cost goes down, and the TNUoS cost that we've just been talking about rising, that will also come down as well. Customers will also think about load managing in order to reduce peak capacity market costs, which I've just talked to. So finishing off, Clean Power 2030 is definitely coming. I don't know if we will hit 2030. In fact, I suspect we probably won't. However, the engine is in motion, the vehicle is in motion, and if we don't hit Clean Power in 2030, we probably will in 2032 or 2033. So we do need to, I would encourage you that you do need to think about the ways in which clean power might affect your business, your hedging strategy, volatile energy market costs, increasing industry costs, and the need to explore flexibility in on-site generation. Finally, at the bottom of this, you can see a QR code, but you will also get an email after this call with some information about it all, where I go into a bit more detail on all of this content. Apologies, I've overrun, Greg. I hope that was helpful.
No, it was. I'm very conscious of the fact there's an awful lot of information there, and I've seen a lot of interesting questions that have been coming through, and we've obviously got a number of questions for you, Steve, that that have been submitted before the start of the webinar. So you're not done just yet. So go and have a glass of water, and I look forward to catching up with you later on.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for your time. So can I invite Michelle onto stage, please? Good afternoon, Michelle. Michelle's going to have a walk through CPPAs, and I think one of the things, my takeaways from Stephen, is that there is going to be some day ahead volatility, and hopefully what Michelle's going to talk us through is how we can maybe look at taking that out of the equation for commodity moving forward. So Michelle, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much. So hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Stevens, and I'm the Generation Services Sales Manager here at npower Business Solutions. And as Greg alluded to, I'm going to be here talking to you and giving you an update on corporate PPAs, and also a little bit about on-site generation as well. So I will briefly touch on that. I think just echoing what a number of people have said this morning, in particular Rob, and then also Steve, about the marketplace and 2030 and where we're gearing for. I think there's food for thought there, and definitely more to come. So if we just take a quick look at the renewable energy generation sector as a whole, and we take a look back, because we've been talking about 2030, which on this side is at the far right hand side, and where the government's projections are of getting us to that 95% of all power generated in the UK comes from renewable sources. And if we take a little look back and we go back to the early 2000s, which is when you were talking about when the first onshore wind turbines started coming on board, which was very much the early 2000s, we only had around 3.5% of renewable generation making up that power makeup, and you had a lot of coal-fired power stations, gas, and small amount of nuclear. And just jump forward by a decade, and you can see that it just doubled, as you got into the early 2010s. You're looking at a double in there. And I think we saw the massive growth from 2010 on that next decade, where we still had the ROC regime and also the FIT regime, which are the subsidy-based schemes that also helped all of these generation assets come on board. So we can see there that when we jumped into 2020, we had around 40% of renewable generation making up our fuel mix, which is a tremendous amount. And I think the biggest milestone for me is in last year, in fact, in 2024, when we saw the tip of the balance of scale go to 51% of generation came from renewable assets. So that was really, really good to see that. And as I say, there's a really big jump from 51 to 95 in only 6 years. I think, Steve alluded to it, that maybe those targets of 2030 and achieving that 95% is quite ambitious, but nonetheless, I think given the quadrupling of offshore wind and what they want to do, tripling of solar, and then the doubling of onshore wind, I think we will gradually get there. But whether or not it's 2030, we'll have to see. But I think there's a lot in planning that's going that way, so it just needs to be built now. But again, there are a lot of things that need to stack up and align to enable those projects to come on board, which I will touch briefly on. So let's have a look at why demand is growing as well. So more and more businesses are looking at securing green energy. It's not just about them buying energy anymore. They're looking for linkages. They're really looking towards their sustainability and their goals. So I think that we've definitely seen a shift in the last 10 years where customers are starting to look more at their power and what they're buying. We're seeing that a lot of those customers over the last 10, 15 years have been looking at REGOs and buying REGOs to green up their brown power. But the one thing I would say is that comes at a premium, and has very much come at a premium. We saw REGO prices only the other year where they were ticking, 20, 24, 25 pound a REGO. And that makes it really, really expensive for an import customer to then look at greening up their portfolio. So there are a couple of things that a lot of those import customers or customers are now considering as a way of trying to reduce that or get a handle on what that means to them, because REGO prices over the last few years have been incredibly volatile, and therefore they're looking for something that's a little bit more sustained, that they as a business can forecast, etc. So what's going on? So you've heard a lot about Clean Power 2030 and the action plan and where we're looking at, in terms of the development there. There's going to be, Rob mentioned it as well, and Stephen definitely mentioned it in terms of CFDs. So again, increased budgets around CFDs and those auctions. The mention there that, in the future, around half of the projects will be under CFD. So again, I think one of the biggest more pivotal things that really impact generators rather than anything else is planning. It's planning and grid, and that's a massive, massive foothold in that market space. So for all developers, whether they're large-scale developers, individuals looking to build something next to their buildings, for example, planning and grid have been a major concern. So I think moving forward in terms of that significant growth, you've got to have all of that. You've got to have all of that in situ to be able to support it. That's going to be the major player for that. Yes, routes to market are really important, but if you haven't got the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure, such as a network, then that power is going nowhere unless it can be used on site. And the vast majority of projects are not used on site. They are exported. On the larger projects, they are exported. So I'll have a quick look now in terms of direct power purchasing agreements. So again, using power on site. So why would generators, or rather why would businesses like yourselves think about, putting some generation on site? Stephen mentioned there about putting a battery and sort of displacing market costs. That's a really, really important thing. If you can maybe put some solar panels on your roof, or if you have land and you can attach the solar panels to your land and directly wire it in, then it doesn't have to be solar panels, by the way, but that tends to be the main advice for many businesses at the moment. But some are considering wind turbines, for example. But what it does is it will help you towards your sustainability targets. Importantly, it can help protect you from the volatile markets, the volatile power markets. More importantly, it can help to reduce the costs. So one of the biggest things, if you are looking to put any renewable generation on your building or attached to your building, is that for every megawatt or kilowatt that you're using, you are not pulling it from the grid. And Stephen mentioned some of those costs that you will be excised from, and that's really, really important. But again, it's all down to scalability. So if you're only putting a small amount of solar, you are still saving, but albeit it's a very small saving, but all of those things add up. You can potentially earn revenue from that for any businesses that are not running 24/7, and you put solar on your roof and you maybe close at 6 o'clock when you get towards the summer evenings, as we're getting now into the nice spring, early summer, then you will have some excess. So there are some routes to market for any excess that you have, which is called the Smart Export Guarantee, which is something the government brought in, and all main suppliers offer that as a route to market for any excess that's not used on site. So that's one of the things that you can do. For anything where it's around 20 plus megawatts per annum, definitely consider doing that. And then, one of the key considerations on that is thinking about your meter operating agreement and your data collection costs. A lot of the conversations I've had with our import customers have really focused on that. So yes, they may have put some solar panels on their roof or on their multiple sites and have a small amount of export, but you have to consider the cost of a meter operating agreement and data collection and the balance between those two of what you may receive in revenue, just to make sure it's not counterproductive. And again, if it's slightly larger and you've got more and you've got maybe potential 5 gigawatts per annum or above, then you can look at a PPA. So that's directly selling with my team, for example, that we can help facilitate a power purchasing agreement, which is a route to sell that power. So I'm going to talk about corporate PPAs. And after this, these two slides, I will be doing a poll just to gauge some kind of audience participation in terms of viewpoints and interest, really. So what's a corporate PPA? So we've just spoken about direct PPAs, where you're putting something on site and utilising it on site. A corporate PPA is where we're matching an import customer to a generator. It's fully traceable. The benefits there are you don't miss any of the on costs that you've got currently with your import supply, but what it can give you is a benefit in terms of price certainty for the period that you're contracting. It also can help you support your net zero targets and sustainability and CSR, for example, and it also can help the UK development in relation to new build projects that are coming on board as well. So my next slide is just going to have a look, because a lot of people ask, well, how does it flow? What does it look like? So this is just a very basic diagram of going from left to right, in terms of the left hand side being the PPA or the generator, and the right hand side being somebody like yourselves on the supply agreement. And the arrows, if I take you to the very top of that diagram, so you have on the left hand side the PPA is required between the generator and the import customer, and then you agree to sleeve or net either all of that volume or a proportion of that volume. So the purple arrows then direct that it comes into npower Business Solutions. My team will have the PPA. We will then work with you as an import customer for your supply agreement, which is on the far right hand side. Those certificates that we mentioned in terms of the REGOs, because all of the projects will come with REGOs, will then also flow with the power. So they will be received into npower Business Solutions account, and then they will be scheduled across to yourself as a customer for the volume that you're taking under the PPA. Now, in terms of the how the power price works, there are many different things, but we'll keep it very, very simple. But we agree to pay the generator £1 per megawatt minus any imbalance and management fee costs. But in the background, you may well have struck up that agreement to pay a fixed price for a fixed period of time. That then is actually noted into your contract and also into the generator's PPA contract as well. So therefore, it's a mirror image of what volume and also what term, what volume and what price is going to be scheduled across there, along with the REGOs that are then also going to be flowing into it. So that nicely sits in terms of how a route to market. There are several that we do. Some are extremely more complicated, but this is just a very, very small and albeit simplified version of how the power moves, etc. But from an import customer's perspective, you don't see any difference on your import bill. If you're only taking 50% of your volume from a wind farm, for example, and you have agreed X price, then for your 50% of your volume, you will have X price. And for the other 50% of your volume, your remaining volume, you would be trading that in the normal way. So this would just be considered almost like a black trade. So you'd have that volume at X price plus any other volumes, give you your demand weighted price. That's a question that comes up quite often, actually, in terms of how does that work? I think now in terms of myself, I'm just going to ask for the poll. So I'm just going to ask Laura to do that. So we're just asking the question in terms of how likely you will be to consider securing renewable supply via a corporate PPA. That'll be really interesting to see in terms of people we've got on here, how you're going to vote there. So let's just have a look and see how that plays out. We'll see the poll on here, Laura. Yeah, okay, so we've got a good level of votes coming through now. Almost a third, nearly a third, that's starting to move now, have not considered previously, but they're now interested. Actually, we've got a fair, over half of you that are voting are either already investigating it or now considering it. We've got around a quarter that are not interested, but again, that might just be their particular business in terms of what they're doing. We've got around 99 votes, so we just need a couple more votes there and then we'll be finished. So yes, really good insight there, with around 10% of you looking to plan to arrange it in the next 2 years and around 7% in the next 5 years. That's really interesting. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Thank you. Over to you now, Greg. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Thanks ever so much. While I ask the other guys if they can join me back on the stage, that'd be great. One thing that I was really interested in, and we've had a couple of questions that were pre-submitted, and a question that's come up during the course of the conversation, Michelle. Do you have to be an MBS customer to take a CPPA or a PPA from us?
The short answer is no, but it makes it more complicated if we're not involved in the relationship. And the reason being is depending, and I'll keep it really quick, the reason being is that it really depends on the asset that you're looking to do a corporate PPA with, and then the complexity around that. So I'll leave it like that. Otherwise, I could talk for another 15 minutes. So, yeah.
Thanks, Michelle. No, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
And guys, thank you there's obviously been a huge amount of information, which we wanted to focus on getting that information across to you. So we have a fairly short sort of window for Q&As. As I think you've said, I've seen that the guys on the stage with me, they've been answering questions through the course of it. If they've not get to you, they will get to you after the call. So you please expect a response from us. So I'm just going to ask you one killer question each, if that's okay, in the interest of brevity. Rob, I'm going to kick off with you first, because we had a lot of these questions that came in submitted before the news overnight, where President Trump and the US government have kind of pressed pause on, I guess, TNUoS coming the T word, but there's a lot of concern in the market about how tariffs may impact the UK energy infrastructure, specifically on LNG imports. That you've already shown a great slide that said 70% comes from the US. What's Cornwall saying? What are you saying? What comfort can we give to our audience on where we are at the moment?
We'd be surprised if the UK put tariffs on imported gas. Of course, we have been taxing gas for power stations for years. We'd be perhaps, I don't know how the future may go. Could you see a tax on the export of gas? That's tariffs can be import and export, can't they? Yeah. More seriously, expect the bigger input on costs for stuff to make things like wires and turbines and all of that. And
that's where you'll see the significant costs, in your opinion. Okay, yeah, thanks, Rob. Thank you. Steve, yours were the killer messages for this session. So we had lots of good news from Rob, Lots of less than good news from you. But overall, the overwhelming sort of majority of questions that we've received with regard to Clean Power 2030, what can large consumers do to reduce non-commodity costs? Oh, Steve, you're on mute.
How embarrassing. Apologies for repeating some of the messages I was saying earlier, but reducing your consumption means and having on-site generation means you're not paying for you're not paying industry costs on the electricity that you generate yourself or the electricity that you avoid. If you're able to explore reducing your electricity connection capacity, then you will reduce the size of your GSUoS and TNUoS costs too.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you very much. Over to you, Michelle. Again, lots of different questions. I'm really sorry but again, really useful sessions, really lots of information that needed to be shared. So we're going to have to shorten our Q&A session. But again, one of the questions I'm seeing is, what's the minimum volume in terms of import you would consider to be a viable CPPA project?
It would be sort of around the 8 to 10 gig on the import. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, sort of supplementary question to that. If we install on-site generation, would I still need to pay non-commodity charges on that particular volume?
No, you wouldn't. So if you self-generate on site by any mechanism, as Steve said, then you don't pay any of those costs, because for every kilowatt or megawatt that you do using that, it's not pulled from the grid, so therefore you don't have those costs.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you to all three of you. Thank you for your time and your expertise. It's really appreciated. But sadly, our time is now up. So thank you very much indeed for attending. We hope you found it really, really useful. There'll be a recording that'll come online. Please check in our LinkedIn messages and you'll find us there. And if we haven't been able to answer your questions today, please be assured that we will get around to it either today or as soon as we possibly can, to make sure that you've got those questions answered. So on behalf of myself and my esteemed colleagues, thank you very much indeed for your time. We look forward to speaking to you at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.